Before we go on to our next speaker, we really want you to let you all know that so far we've been moving pretty good on time, and we really want to thank the audience for all the energy. We're still continuing. We are about to move on to our next speaker, but the next speaker is a surprise.
Give it for me. Give it for me.
No, sorry. The next speaker is a surprise to all the women out there and all of those who've been asking, when is our English speaker coming in? So our next speaker is a woman, and she's going to deliver her speech in English.
We're keeping her. ولكن خلينا نعرف عن ضيفتنا. ضيفتنا هي سيدة دكتورة حاصلة على شهادة الدكتوراه في الفلسفة في تأهيل اضطرابات التخاطب من أمريكا. مرحة، وهذا أهم شيء، ونبغى كل الجميع أو الجميع الموجودين يتحمسوا أكثر مع اللي حتقوله. إذا حابين هي حتستخدم طبعا بعض الكلمات أو الجمل العربية علشان يعني يكون في تواصل أكثر، ولكن ضيفتنا مختارينها لأهمية أو لهدف معين، وهو اختيارها للتحدي في الإبداع وليس الإبداع بحد ذاته. دائما تستغل أنها تستقي أفكار الإبداع والتحديات من ذوي الاحتياجات الخاصة اللي هم في تخصصها. أعتقد جزء من هدفها واللي حتتحدث عنه اليوم يخلي كل إنسان يقول أنه من أي أحد يقدر يستفيد، ومن أي شيء صغير أو كبير بينه وبين يده يقدر يخلق إبداع ويقدر يوصل.
So our next speaker is a lady who was born in Egypt. She grew up in Riyadh. She decided to do her education and her PhD in the United States. She is a speech language, sorry.
We can help you with that.
Yeah.
You just need to come see us right after this.
Please welcome Dr.Haidi AlAskari. Everyone. I'm sorry for that error. It's speech language pathologist.
Correct. Very well done.
Thank you. And she's also into developing communication skills in disabled kids and also supports research in disabilities.
Correct.
Welcome.
Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh jami'an. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, my name is Haidi, وكثير ناس يسألوني عن اسمي هايدي بالضبط زي الكرتون. So if you ever forget it, you have a reference point. This evening, I'm going to give a very brief talk on challenges to innovation, اللي هي التحديات في الإبداع. For a second, I want you to imagine that you are a teacher, and you have over 100 students that are deaf, and you want to do something creative and innovative with your students. The most logical thing would be, obviously, is to teach them how to dance, okay? And for those of you who have ever seen this dance by the Chinese Disabled People's Performing Art Troupe, it is the most beautiful, precise piece of art that you may ever see in terms of dance, and every single one of those dancers is deaf. They cannot hear, okay? So I want you to think about these kinds of things as we're going through this presentation. Think of yourself in this position. You're faced with an immense challenge. You're faced with a population that you think may not be able to innovate, to do something that is innovative. What is your role in bringing innovation out? Okay? You'll have to thank my scientific background for this, but if you wish to converse with me, define your terms. Okay? I do not know how to have a discussion about any topic until I'm sure that we're discussing the same thing. So what do you mean by innovation? For many of you here, innovation is something new. It's something that is better than what existed. It's economically viable, and it has widespread appeal. This definition is a very corporate business definition in terms of innovation. However, for me, in my line of work, because I don't work in the private sector, and I don't work in a company where we produce things in bulk and I'm looking at outcomes, my definition of innovation may be a little bit different, and that's what I want to get into today. There are millions and millions of definitions of innovation out there. One of them is to renew or change or improve. And that's where I sort of want to start as a starting point this evening. When we look at the history of Muslims and Arabs and other innovators in the world, we know that there is a history of developing innovative ideas, renewing them, and building on them. Now, the question is, where do we go from here? In the past, there's been a lot of talk about globalization 1.0. And that is sort of where countries really compete for innovative ideas. Today we live in a global climate. We're at globalization 3.0, where it's no longer just companies and countries competing, but it is human beings competing against each other. I guarantee you that any one of you sitting here today that has a great idea, there is probably a great likelihood that somebody around the world is sitting somewhere with that very same idea, and bringing you and them together makes a much stronger case for that idea to come out, to be developed, to really serve individuals within our community. So the idea of innovation being a big thing that only countries can compete in, a big thing that only companies compete in, is no longer valid. It really is at the individual human level. And again, I want you to be thinking about that when we go through this presentation. So for me, innovation here is in the middle. Innovation really is a collaboration that happens on an individual level. And you can be one of two things. My definition in terms of the challenges, you can be the innovator, the person who renews, comes up with new ideas, develops these ideas. So by the definition, you are the innovator, sorry. Or you can be the enabler of the innovator, okay? And to me, that role is much more interesting in some ways than the innovator themselves. So what I want to talk about a little bit is the challenges that we see when we talk about being the enabler, because I truly believe you cannot innovate unless you have some enabler around you. That enabler might be your community, it might be another individual, it might be resources, it might be just simple support that you don't even think about. But that enabler is absolutely mandatory for the person who is wanting to innovate to be able to produce and give. Never before in history has innovation offered promise of so much to so many in so short a time. If I think about an idea, I talk about it, within seconds it's on Facebook. With social thinking, everybody's part of the decision-making process. They're your enablers. So it's very important to think about how quickly things happen. We live in a very quick society. We live in a very quickly developing world. And this is going to be important for all of us when we look at technology and innovation of technologies. Again, many of my examples are going to be within the domain of disability. It's what I know. For many of you, if you don't know who Stephen Hawking is, he's probably one of the greatest minds in physics out there. Stephen Hawking was perfectly normal until he was 21 years old. He developed ALS, which is a disease that degenerates the brain and you lose functions. In essence, you become trapped in your body, but your brain is healthy. You can still think, you can still innovate, but you might not be able to get those ideas out. His enablers around him, from scientists to other people who actually enabled him to speak, it became sort of a cyclical thing. People around him who wanted to enable him, they knew he was bright, they knew he was smart, they knew he could develop a whole generation of scientists. They had to enable him in a way that he could give lectures. So they went out and they found innovators who developed technology where he can actually give his lectures on a machine, okay? So there were innovators who developed the machines, enablers who fought to make sure that he got that machine, he was able to use them, and that he was able to give his lectures, which allowed him to become an innovator, which allowed him to become one of the greatest minds in physics today. Okay, so when we talk about the success formula of enablers and innovators, very briefly, I just want to use the analogy of children and parents, okay? Children, to me, are the greatest innovators on earth. whether they have a disability or not. If you spend any time with children, they're curious, they take risks, they're not afraid to ask questions. Spend a few minutes with the kids. Lesh, lesh, lesh. Why? Any parent who spends any time with their kids knows that they're very inquisitive. So by default, anything that goes against your nature of being inquisitive and asking becomes a challenge within our community. It becomes a challenge for the innovator. The lack of critical thinking within curriculums, the lack of tolerance for making mistakes. You know, the idea where the ideal, all of our students have to make A's. For those of you here who are students, I remember my biggest shock when I went to the United States was that an A really didn't matter. I remember one of my professors telling me when I made a very horrifying B on one of my exams, I walked in and I was completely horrified. And he said, the problem is your cup is half full and you're seeing it as half empty. Okay? And then he said, I guarantee you in a couple of weeks, only your mistakes are going to be what you remember from this test, which was very true. So I think part of our challenges here as parents, as educators, as teachers, trying to enable our future innovators for this generation, for our future within the Muslim world, the Arab world, certainly within Saudi Arabia. We have to teach them tolerance. We have to accept inquisitiveness. We want to be able to allow them to ask questions in a safe environment to make those mistakes to move forward. Okay? Another interesting mind, and I just want you to think about this. You have a child who's 4 years old. You're told she's never going to amount to anything. You should put her in an institution. Okay? She's never going to develop. She's never going to learn. Just put her somewhere and forget about her. She didn't speak until she was 5 years old as Temple Grandin. And for those of you who don't know her, there's a movie out on her now where you can look about how she thinks in pictures. She completely changed the whole industry of cattle and agriculture within her field. Okay? So that is extremely important to be able to give the opportunity. Man's mind, once stretched by a new idea, never regains its original dimensions. No better example than Christina, who had her right hemisphere completely removed. All of her right brain was removed when she was 8 years old. I'm very proud to say I was just at a conference with her. She just got her master's degree as a speech-language pathologist to help enable other people. Okay? So, in closing, for me, the question really is, do I want to be an innovator or do I want to be an enabler? And I'm very proud to stand up here today in a conference on innovation and say, I have no interest in being an innovator. I am extremely interested in being the enabler of somebody who will innovate in the future. Right? The bigger question is, for each and every one of you sitting here, what are you going to be? If you cannot innovate, I hope and I pray that you don't bring somebody down who does innovate, that you're there to support them, that you're there to give them the encouragement and clap loudly for them, because they are still our innovators. They're still our successes in the future. Thank you very much.
شكرا دكتورة هايدي.